and I'm going to hit start broadcast right now.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. It looks like we are ready to begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is provided for FISB grantees and their subawardees. Our webinar today is called Beyond the Finish Line, Planning for Sustainability. Our event today is designed to reinforce and to expand upon the sustainability tip sheet that was shared with your primary grantee contacts. I believe it was last week. So I'd like to take a moment just to briefly introduce this topic, just by saying that we know that project sustainability can be a great challenge in the field of public health. Oftentimes, the public supports these innovative and necessary projects and services, but many times these efforts are not sustained if the primary funding source is discontinued. So today we'll be talking about what sustainability means for your adolescent pregnancy prevention initiative and what steps you can take to increase the odds of sustainability. My name is Stephanie Buenoso. I am a program manager with ETR Associates, and I have with me today Jill Elnicki. She is a senior program specialist with ETR, and she'll be assisting us with some of the interactive components of today's webinar. Jill and I both are part of the training and technical assistance team for FISB's Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention grantees. And we've had the pleasure of interacting with many of you at various trainings and through individual TA. So in the work that Jill and I and the rest of our training and technical assistance team have done, and for me in the past year, since that's how long I've been on this project, we've heard from many of you through the training and technical assistance needs assessments, through the conference and training evaluations, and just informally through some conversations, that sustainability planning is a critical need. We've also heard that many of the grantees, they've given a lot of thought to what is needed to sustain their work in adolescent pregnancy prevention, but fewer grantees have really developed a concrete sustainability plan. And so we know that this is important for achieving sustainability. So our goal for today's webinar is to respond to this need. So Jill and I have dug deep into the sustainability literature, and we wanted to pull out some useful tips, tools, and strategies that all of you can use on your projects to plan for sustainability if you have not done so already, or just to help the planning along further. So we have 3 objectives that we'd like to accomplish today. And these are that by the end of today's webinar, we hope that participants will be able to explain the concept of sustainability and why it's important, state the factors that promote project sustainability, and develop concrete strategies for increasing your project sustainability. So we have done our best to make this webinar to be participatory and interactive. However, there are a lot of you in attendance today, so please bear with us if we don't get to all of your comments and questions. But there are several ways that we would like to invite you to participate. So to pose questions or to share comments, we'd like for you to use your question box tool. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a little toolbar, and within that there is a tab for questions. So if you enter your questions or your comments there, the presenters will be able to see them. All of the participants will not be able to see what you type in, but where we ask for some brainstorming and some ideas, we'll do our best to read all of those comments and to reflect them back to you so that you can hear or what your other grantees or other participants are seeing or thinking. We'll also be asking you to answer some poll questions and to raise your hand. So if you want to raise your hand, you should see, again, on that toolbox, there's a little hand raise icon that has an up arrow. And if you just click on it now, just to make sure that everyone is seeing that icon, go ahead and raise your hand, just so I know that you know where to find it. I see hands are being raised. All right, we've got about a third of you at this point. Okay. Go ahead and keep raising your hands if you haven't done so already. Let's see if we can get all those hands raised. We'll be using this tool throughout the webinar, so I just want to make sure that you guys know where to find it. Okay. So about 2/3 of you, checking to see if you're paying attention as well, right? All right, so it looks like most of you have figured out the hand-raising tool. There's still a few of you who haven't. If you're having any questions with the technical side of things, you can type your question into that question box, and someone who's on the line will be able to help you with that. Okay. All right, so go ahead and put your hands down for now. I'd also like to remind you that your phones are on mute. So during periods of discussion, if you raise your hand, we can unmute your line if you would like to speak. And I'd also like to let you know that for some of the interactive portions of today's webinar, Jill and I will be switching screens. And so when that happens, that generic GoToWebinar screen that you may have seen when you first logged on will pop up onto your computer. So know that you're not getting booted off the webinar. It's just a brief a moment while we transfer screens. But I just wanted to give you a little heads up on that. All right, so let's begin with a poll. We'd like to, let's see here. All right, looks like you're not seeing what I am seeing just yet. I'll keep talking and see if it catches up. All right, so we'd like to begin with a poll. And this is really just to get a sense of where you are with respect to thinking about sustainability for your FISB-funded adolescent pregnancy prevention project. So if you are sitting with teams, you can answer this question as a team, or if you're sitting by yourself, you can provide your own individual response based on your perspective. I'm going to pull the poll up now. All right, so the poll question is to please check the option that best describes your project. It looks like you guys may not be seeing this just yet. All right, so we may need to switch over to your computer if this delay is happening. You guys see the poll yet?
It is not. I can surely try it on my end, Stephanie. Oh, there you go.
All right, so here we go. So now our poll is there. So please check the option that best describes your project. So we've thought a little bit about sustainability. We have a clear vision for what we want to sustain, or we are taking steps to sustain our project. So go ahead and begin completing the poll now. All right, looks like about half of you have voted, so we'll wait a little longer, get a few more responses in there. Okay. We have almost all of you. All right, and the final votes are coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And let's see, if you didn't get your response in there, go ahead and do it now. All right, closing the poll. Okay, so what we see based on these poll results, so about half of you have thought a little bit about sustainability. 21% of you have a clear vision for what you want to sustain. And then about a third of you are taking steps to sustain your project. So this is kind of what we expected to see. And I think these results just reflect as well that many of you are kind of working under different contexts. And some of you are further into your funding than others, and may have given more thought of what is needed to sustain your project. And some of you may be just thinking about this for the first time. So we hope by the end of this webinar that we'll give you some ideas and strategies to strengthen your sustainability planning efforts. And for those of you who are at the bottom and you're already taking steps to sustain your project, we'd like to invite you to share some of those strategies and successes towards the end of the webinar so that we can contribute to our collective learning. Okay. So what do we mean by sustainability? So many of you are operating under different implementation structures, and as a result, each of your respective projects will likely define sustainability in a different way. So before we move forward, we'd like to hear first from you about how you would define sustainability. So don't peek onto the next slide. I know you have these in your handouts. And just take a few moments to type into the question box some words or phrases that come to mind when you think of sustainability. All right, and I am going to read these out here. All right, so I'm seeing keep going, long-lasting, ongoing, diverse funding, keeping it running smoothly, ongoing, steady funding, lots of dollar signs, and literally dollar signs, ongoing, keeping your program strong. We have partnerships, a lasting project, revenue generating, the ability to continue for a long time. So a lot of these are looking at longevity, ongoing, having that secure funding to make sure that your project continues. Great, there's tons of responses coming in. I see buy-in, integrating the program into an existing system, building, so not just continuing, but maybe building your efforts. All right, so long-term for the community, program success, good, that's a good one. Next steps, transitioning to new levels, new phases. Great, all right, so lots of ideas coming in, and again, bear with me, there's a lot of you, so I'll try to hit the key points that I see. But you hit on some of the key phrases that come to mind when we think about sustainability. So this next slide, and it looks like you might have a little delay, so you can follow along on your handouts if I'm talking ahead of you guys. But this next slide shows some definitions of sustainability that come out of the literature. And when you go to the literature, there really is no single agreed upon definition of sustainability that you find. So some of the definitions that we pulled out, and these are also in the tip sheet that your primary grantee contacts were received last week. So some definitions that we see are the capacity of an organization to achieve long-term success and stability, and to serve its clients and consumers without threat of losing financial support or quality of services. Another definition is the ability to continue services after a funding period is over, and to ensure that the organization becomes a permanent part of community resources. And then a third definition is the institutionalization of a project as an integral part of an organization. So some of the key phrases that come out of these definitions are long-term success without threat of financial loss, permanency, institutionalization, it becomes integral. So these are just things to keep in mind. And as we move forward with this webinar, we'll be referring to sustainability as it's the ability to maintain your program and its benefits over time, and specifically beyond this period of funding that you're receiving from FISB. Okay? All right, so I'm seeing that you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Jill, I might transfer over to you. I think that I'm just getting a delay. Is that okay? And then you can keep the slides moving forward?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do that. So I'm changing to you as a presenter. Appreciate your patience, everyone. There's always a technical glitch. Let's see here. All right, Jill, I am making you the presenter.
Okay.
And so we should be on slide 8, which is levels of sustainability.
I'm ready when it comes through, of course. Give me a second here to open it up. So, Marissa, I will need you to look at the question box as we move along. And you guys can, a little bit of my control. Okay, everybody got a good view of that, I assume.
There we go. All right, I think that will work a little bit better. So advance it to one more slide, so levels of sustainability. All right, so what we want to see, all right, here we go. Okay, so and then just kind of moving along with the idea of defining what it is that we mean by sustainability. These are some other ideas that came out of the literature, and this is a way of thinking about sustainability in terms of these varying levels. So the first level is called continuation, and this is really referring to the ongoing implementation of your project or your services under your existing host organization. So essentially this means that your project would acquire new funding to replace your initial seed funding from FISB to ensure that your current services continue. And often this is the level of sustainability that is most commonly thought of. So for example, your current FISB funding may be used to hire health educators to go into a school or into a community-based setting to implement an adolescent pregnancy prevention curriculum. And so in order to continue this project at the end of your current funding cycle, additional funding would likely be required to support this type of implementation model. So institutionalization is a little bit different, and here I'll be speaking about it in terms of shifting the ownership of the project to another organization or to multiple organizations in the community so that the project becomes formally integrated into that organization's operating procedures. So if we were to carry that same example forward, if your current funding is used to hire an outside educator to implement a curriculum within a school or community setting, institutionalization would mean that you begin shifting that responsibility to the school or the agencies so that it becomes integrated into that agency. Okay? So this might include local or school agency policies that support the implementation of the project, having dedicated staff training, and funding within those agencies to ensure their ongoing implementation. So just a different way of thinking about sustainability. And then this third box here on the right, dissemination, this is taking it even one step further and saying that you're going beyond the implementation of the project in your particular setting that you're working in now towards disseminating your project to other sites or adapting it to serve new services. Okay, so just getting a broader reach. So looking at all three of these, I just want to reiterate that there's no single correct model or correct definition of sustainability. And in some cases, your project, when you begin doing your vision for sustainability, you may have each of these components involved in your sustainability plan. Okay, so you may continue to implement some of your project components, and then you may move towards shifting some of them to another organization. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so given all these different definitions, why is it important for us to talk about sustainability? And I think for many of us this may seem obvious. We are meeting a need in our respective communities, and we want to ensure that this need continues to be met. In addition, we also want to make use of the valuable financial and non-financial resources we put into our projects. So as many of us know, our projects typically need a certain amount of time and maturity before the benefits really accrue. So with your federal funding, many of you have assessed the needs of your communities. You've selected and adapted programs to meet those needs. You've hired and trained staff. You've established an infrastructure, right? So all of that takes time. And with our federal funding, we want to make sure that we make the most of these investments by ensuring their continued implementation where we can. And then the third thing that I wanted to touch upon is this idea of maintaining trust. And so I think that part of the investing in our communities involves the time and energy spent building relationships and trust with our community partners. And so I know in my own experience, I used to do work with the juvenile justice setting. And for some of the facilities that I was trying to get into, it took me a really long time to build those relationships so that they were open to the services that we wanted to provide. And so, once these relationships are formed, you really want to nurture them so that they can continue, right? And so too often when our funding disappears, these projects end, and that can influence the relationships that we've built over time. So these are just a few of the reasons why I think it's important to discuss sustainability. Using your question box, are there any other reasons sustainability is important to you or to your team? Let's see what we got here. All right, so I'm seeing, yeah, go ahead and enter into the question box. I'm not seeing anything coming in. All right, so to continue serving youth, right, so making sure that you're meeting the needs of the youth that you're serving. Continue to make progress on a challenge. So that's a good one. So sometimes these things can't be achieved. Our goals may not be able to be achieved in the way that we want them in the time that we're given. So things take additional time to really tackle a challenge. So keeping those hired for the program employed, right, so we want to keep, many of us want to keep our jobs too. So that's a good thing to think about when you're thinking about what sustainability means for you. Continue doing the good work, right, so to lower pregnancy rates and raise academic achievement, I would assume. Right, so many successes with youth have the potential to reverse. So even though our efforts may be decreasing pregnancy rates, we want to continue with that work so that we don't see things, the trends start to change. Okay, I see systemic change and policy change within our state helps create a healthier community to ensure the problem or issue is not ignored or forgotten. Good, so here's a good one. So changing norms, and I think that's something that wasn't explicitly stated in some of these definitions, but one way to think about sustainability too is that you're literally changing the norms of society so that things become an expectation that they'll be done a certain way, or they'll be done differently. Good. All right, so I'm going to close out of that. Those are great responses. All right, so now that we have talked a little bit about what sustainability is, why it's important, I'd like to do another poll. All right, so what approach will your team take to reach sustainability? And you may not know the answer to this question yet, so you can check any that applies here. Is it continuation? Is it institutionalization? Dissemination? Is it something different altogether? Or are you not sure yet? So go ahead and take the time to complete the poll. Am I using this poll for the organizers on the phone? I clicked the button, but I'm not sure if someone else did at the same time.
I did not click, so I think you did stuff.
All right, so I am hosting. I've got the poll. All right, so the results are coming in. This is what happens when you do webinars and you can't see people and we're all in different places. All right, so we have about 70% of you have voted. Give it a few more seconds here. All right, so it looks like most of you have voted. There are a few lingering people who have not put in their responses. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And share those results. Okay, so it looks like we are kind of across the board here. So many of you are looking to continue your projects. Some of you are looking to institutionalize. A few are looking to disseminate to other audiences. A couple of you say something different altogether. And many of you are not sure yet. Okay, and so I think that this just speaks to where you are with respect to thinking about the sustainability for your project. All right, so Jill, will you go back to the sustainability factors slide? All right, so now I'd like to move on to the next portion of the webinar. And so here, this will be talking about sustainability factors. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, Jill and I dug into the literature to find out what the research says about sustainability. And there's not a whole lot out there, but in the last decade, several different frameworks have emerged that are supported by systematic reviews of public health projects that have been sustained successfully over time versus those that have not. So Jill presented some of this research in the tip sheet that was shared last week that came out of one of the models used by the Finance Project. If you haven't looked at this already, I highly suggest that you take a look. And please forward it along to your subawardees or to your community partners. For today's webinar, we're going to build upon what was in the tip sheet, briefly highlighting factors that cut across some of the different frameworks that are out there. And so for those of you right now who may be thinking that sustainability is a really big task, I want to demystify that perspective somewhat. So much of what has come out of the literature I think is fairly intuitive, and it really just reinforces the idea of good project management practices. But that being said, I think it's really helpful to look at these factors kind of together through this lens of sustainability and to use them to help guide your efforts. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So across the literature, sustainability factors kind of tend to fall into these two different categories. So we have those that are related to your internal capacity to sustain the project, and those that are related to your external or to external factors, and that may influence the success of your project. So internal factors are going to be those characteristics of your project or the organization within which your project is housed. And external factors include a broader range of social, economic, and political factors that may influence the success of your project. So I will briefly talk through some of these factors now. So go ahead and move to the next slide. All right, so this slide it was showing some of the internal factors. And the first one we have on our list is having a clear and compelling vision of what your project intends to achieve, as well as a clear picture for how your project can be sustained. And then, to add to that, the internal leadership to carry that vision forward. So this is a factor that has emerged from the literature as characteristics of those projects that are sustained over time. And so the research shows that visions that respond to a real need in the community are the most successful. And if your vision originates from the community, that's even better, right? So you want your vision to be rooted in community values. And we also know that projects are more likely to be sustained if the project and its vision fit within the larger organization's mission. So if you are focused on adolescent pregnancy prevention, but the agency is focused on after-school tutoring, you may want to think about how your vision aligns with that agency's mission. So before we move forward, I'd like to do just a quick and dirty assessment here. So raise your hands if you would consider your team or your agency to have a lot of capacity in this area. So you have a clear vision and the leadership to carry it forward. And this is just an informal polling process that we'll be doing. We'll show our results at the end. All right, so lots of hands going up. I'd say we have about a third of you. Let's go with 33%, Jill, in terms of our, I'll write that down. All right, 33%. Okay, so then moving on to the next factor, you can go ahead and lower your hands. The next factor is that we know that sustainable projects cannot exist without strong internal systems and organizational capacity. So this includes having the staff capacity to implement the project and the necessary systems in place for fiscal management, accounting, governance, right? So I think some of this is straightforward. It's hard to sustain a project without having the staff and the structures in place to really keep it running. So let's continue our informal assessment here. Go ahead and raise your hand if you consider your project to have strong internal systems and organizational capacity. All right, so we have about the same, maybe a little bit more. I am seeing, let's go with 38% of you on that one. All right, so go ahead and lower your hands. And then moving to the next factor. All right, so the next factor that's emerged from the literature is having a results orientation or strong program evaluation. And I think this is an area that many of you should be pretty familiar with, at least. So program evaluation is going to benefit sustainability of projects in two ways. So first, your evaluation keeps you on track with your goals and outcomes. It's going to help you improve your project if something is not working. So this is what's going to help you develop a quality project, right? And then second, if your evaluation shows that the project is having an important impact, this will help you make a stronger case for why it needs to continue, right? So if you can show that your project is really meeting a need in the community, more people will likely want to give it support. But I do think that it's worth mentioning that a common sustainability myth is that any project with good evaluation results will be sustained, right? So we know that a quality project is important, but each of these additional factors are necessary to kind of get that buy-in and support. All right, so let's go to our informal polling system. So go ahead and raise your hands if you would consider your project to have strong results orientation or a lot of capacity with program evaluation. All right, so we have about, let's go with around 30, 31, 30, let's go with 31% of you would rate yourselves fairly high with program evaluation. Okay, so moving on to, you can go ahead and lower your hands, and moving on to the next factor, this has to do with adaptability. So we know that sustainable projects are those whose leaders are skilled at anticipating, influencing, and responding to new opportunities or threats in the community. So we're laughing around that? All right.
We're okay.
All right. So your ability to adapt to changing conditions is critical to sustainability. So if, for example, you know, say that youth mental health is like a new, hot topic that's out there, and if you can show how your program might align with that issue, or how it can adapt to maybe incorporate some of those components, then that can ensure continued funding for you. So raise your hands if you would consider your project to be highly adaptable. Okay, so a little fewer of you maybe here, maybe not. Numbers are coming in. All right, let's go with about 28% of you on that one. All right, and so the next one is communications. So communications refers to strategically getting the message out to stakeholders, including your funders and the public about your project. So I think the key take home here is that if people don't know who you are and why your work is important, they can't support you. And so often we do an amazing job of collecting data about the successes of our project, but we're not as good about strategically communicating those successes and those results to others. And we need to do that so people know who we are so that they can support us, right? So each of these, we could do a whole training on each of these, but I'll stop there and let's just do an informal poll. So how many of you would say that your project is skilled at communicating your successes and results to your key stakeholders, to the public, and to your funders? Go ahead and raise your hands. Okay. So I'm going to go with about, oh, we're slowly going up, going up. Let's go with 21% on that one. So we'll close it off at 21%. All right, so slightly fewer of you focusing on communications. The next factor that has emerged from the literature, and this one I think is a biggie, is having a strategic financing orientation, and I also put in here diversified funding. And so although we know that project sustainability requires a lot more than just having funding, we also know that having stable funding to do the work that you need to do is one of the most important factors for sustainability that emerges from the literature. So a strategic financing orientation means that project leaders know what activities they want to sustain and the ones that they need to sustain, what resources they need in order to sustain those activities, and how to access those resources. So across the literature, having diversified sources of funding comes out as a really important factor to sustainability. And so this means that the financing for your project comes from multiple sources. So this may be federal funding, foundations, private donors, or what's called social enterprises, or like a fee-for-service kind of model, or even in-kind support, so people who donate location or services, volunteers to help your program run. So I'll stop there. I'm going to ask two questions on this one actually. So first, by show of hands, how many of your adolescent pregnancy prevention projects are supported by more than one funding source, so something outside of FISBE? Go ahead and raise your hands for that one. All right, so it looks like we have about 14% of you, 15, let's go 15%. Okay, so that really speaks to this need for a diversified funding, right? So many of you are operating with one primary funding source. So looking at kind of this idea of strategic financing, the bigger picture, how many of you would consider yourselves to have a lot of capacity in this area? So, you know, good about staying on top of the different resources that are out there, how you can go about obtaining them. So how many of you would rate yourself high with having a strategic financing orientation? All right, so this one, it looks like the numbers are a lot lower. So we'll go with, let's go with 12% on that one. All right. Yeah, and I think this is, this is common for many of us. You know, that we're so good, we have the passion, we're out there and we're doing the work, and then kind of knowing the business side of things and how to bring in funding, especially for those of us who may be working in the field, may not be something that we're used to doing all the time. All right, so the last one I wanted to talk about here, the final internal factor related to sustainability is actually having a sustainability plan that brings together all of the pieces necessary for your project to continue. And so good plans clarify where your project is, your vision of sustainability, and the specific steps that you'll need to take to achieve that sustainability. And we'll be talking a lot more about sustainability plans on the second half of this webinar. So for now, let's just have you raise your hand if you think that your team or your project has a lot of capacity with respect to sustainability planning. Okay, so we have a few more coming in. All right, so let's say around 20, 21, so let's go 21% on sustainability planning. All right. Good, okay, so good. So we'll be spending a little more time talking about that. Let's go to the next slide, and there are three other external factors that I wanted to touch upon that have come out of the literature as well. So again, these are the factors that are external to the inner workings of your project. So the first is having, go ahead and click that one more time, there we go. The first is having political support for your project. So we all know that no matter how well the internal components of your project operate, the overall economic and political climate will really influence your ability to get things done, right? So this may come from the federal level, the state, tribal, or local levels. The thing I want to iterate, though, is that just because the economic and political climate is external to your project doesn't mean that you can't do anything about it. So it's important to educate people of influence about your work. And a recent example I'll share is that in California, the Office of Maternal, Child, and Adolescent Health recently held a conference for adolescent pregnancy prevention providers, and some of the PrEP grantees were in attendance. And the director of the California Department of Public Health was invited to open the conference. And so this is a great way to build relationships with key decision makers and to inform them about the work that they're doing, right? So if they know who you are, then it's easier for them to provide you with support. All right, so informally, so let's go ahead and raise your hands if you would consider your project to rank high in terms of political support. Let's see. So either everyone stopped paying attention at the same time or nobody raised their hands. Oh, there they come. All right. So we have about 11% of you. Let's go with 12% of you would consider your project to be high in political support. Okay, great. So go ahead and lower your hands. And then the next factor I wanted to talk about here is having a broad base of community support or partnerships. So this includes local businesses, media representatives, community and tribal leaders, youth and their families, others who are have a vested interest in youth well-being. So the thing to remember here when you're thinking about your support from the community and your partners are that people will help to support what they help to create, right? So if more people are involved in your vision of moving this project forward, then they'll be more likely to support it and help keep it going. So think of your partners as people who can help connect you to the resources that you need and the expertise. They may be the ones to take over providing some services if your project has to cut back on your funding. They may be providing you with volunteers, and they can also be the ones to educate and influence others to support your cause. So go ahead and raise your hands. How many of you would consider your project to rank high in having strong community support and partnerships? And think not only do you just have a lot of partners, but are these active partners that have a vested interest in your project? All right, so it looks like about, let's go with 26% of you would rank high there. Oh, it's going up. Let's go 31%. I'm catching it at 31. You guys had a lot of last-minute hand raisers. All right. Okay, so then the final external factor that I wanted to talk about is having key champions. And this one is related to these other two factors of political support and community support and partnerships. And champions are the leaders within your community or your different partner organizations who are really committed to your project vision. And they're going to be the ones to broker connections, channel resources, build networks, and generate support for your project. So these are the people who tend to be really well connected. They're the strong leaders, and they're really passionate about your cause. And like that passion I want to iterate, because when that passion comes through, it can help get people on board for what you're trying to sustain. So in your work, it's important to be strategic about who you select to be your champions, right? So sometimes this happens naturally, and sometimes it's very intentional about bringing certain people who are to be on board. So by show of hands, how many would say that you have several key champions in the community who actively support your project? All right, so we have about, votes are coming in, so let's say around 21%, 23% of people would rate themselves high in terms of having key champions. All right, so I just wanted to, I said briefly, that took a little longer than I imagined, go through some of these key factors related to sustainability. And so it looks like for the most part, about a third of you would rate yourself high on any one of these given factors. Some of them are a little bit lower. And I'd say the strategic financing, having political support, those are probably some of the lowest ranking. The highest ranking ones are having strong internal systems and having a clear vision for what you want to sustain. And so we know from the literature that there's no one single factor that's most important. And you know, when you think about your team's capacity, you'll want to think about your current context, who your partners are, and which factors are going to be most important for you to build your capacity in when you think about sustainability. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the sustainability plan. So I'd like to pause for a moment. Jill, go ahead and forward to the next slide. And are there any questions that we have about these factors at this point? And you can go ahead and type them into the chat box, or the question box. So I'm not seeing any questions come in. I do see a question in there about how to raise your hand. Hopefully you figured that one out yet. There's a little hand icon on the toolbox to the right of your screen. If you just click on that, your hand will be raised. All right, so it looks like there are no questions coming in now. So let's go ahead and move forward to the sustainability planning steps. All right, so for the remainder of the webinar, I wanted to talk about some steps that you can take towards creating a sustainability plan. And again, I think the goal here is really to demystify this process. So even though many of these factors may seem fairly intuitive, there are a lot of them, right? And building your capacity in each of these areas can seem like a daunting task for some of us. So what we're hoping to do is to provide you with some concrete steps and some tools that can help you to launch you into this sustainability planning process. All right, so let's go forward. We are going to do one more poll here. All right, so the poll is, and hopefully you can see this one coming up. Does your project currently have a sustainability plan in place? Can you guys see that poll?
It has not come up yet, Steph.
Okay.
Do you want me to open it?
Yeah, will you? Just to see. I'm not sure why that's not working. Oh, there it was. There it went
there, and then it went away. No, it should not be closed. Jamie, is there a way to reopen the poll?
This is Jamie. I can set it up and relaunch it for you. It'll just take a minute to relaunch since the poll.
That's okay, Jamie. Let's just do it by raising hands. This is just a yes/no. Okay. This is just a yes/no for the most part. So go ahead and just raise your hand if you have a sustainability plan in place. And so when I say sustainability plan, I'm talking more than just, you know, a paragraph or two that you've put into your recent proposal about how you want to sustain your project. I'm talking more of a plan that has action steps, timelines, clearly identified in it. All right, so it looks like about 20% of you have raised your hand, so have a sustainability plan. Okay, great. So let's, so that's just to get a sense of where you are. And again, for those of you who have plans in place, I'm hoping that these tools are something that you can add to the work that you're doing. And also, hopefully, if we have time at the end, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts so that you can share some of your process and successes around your sustainability plan with your colleagues here. All right, so just pulling this back up. Give me a sec. All right, so let's move forward. So talking about the planning steps when it comes to going through a sustainability plan. So these are the steps that we're going to walk through. So Jill, go ahead and click on each one. So the first is to assemble your planning team. The second is to envision your future. The third is to assess your sustainability capacity. The fourth, to prioritize what it is that you want to sustain. The fifth, to identify sustainability strategies. And the sixth is to develop a clear action plan for how you're going to achieve those strategies. The seventh is to implement your action plan. And the last one is to evaluate your efforts. So these come from, this process comes from a website. It's called sustaintool.org. There's a source at the bottom, and I'll point it out to you when we get to the end of the webinar. This is a newer site that has recently kind of taken some of the more recent information from the literature. I really like it, and I like the tools that they present. So I highly encourage you to check out that website and use it for your planning process. So I'm going to walk through each of these steps, and as we do that, I want to highlight an example that came out of Colorado State Prep. So I recently spoke with Jan Mickish, who's the State Prep Coordinator and at the Colorado Department of Human Services, and Zoa Shesky. Zoa, I'm sorry if you're on and I'm saying your last name wrong. I should have gotten that down. But Zoa is the local prep coordinator for the Denver Human Services. And so they shared some ideas with me about the sustainability of their projects. And I wanted to highlight that, thinking about it from both like the state level or the local level. And so what sustainability might look like from those different levels. So moving to the next slide. So the first step is to assemble your team. And again, I think this one's fairly straightforward, but the key is to just to make sure that you have the right mix of people. So you want the right mix of project staff, management, and people who are in the community that, all right, sorry about that, and people who are in the community who may have a vested interest in sustaining your project. So when I asked the Colorado team about their team that they would like to have on board for their sustainability planning, so they suggested to gather people who are supportive, who have the same vision and passion for the work, and who have good leadership qualities. So Zoa provided this example in Denver where they inherited some partners that were key players at the start of the project, but then they found that individuals on their team changed as they identified new partners that provided access to different populations. So I think this just speaks to the dynamic nature of the sustainability planning. So this is an ongoing process, and who's on your team today may be slightly different as your planning goes forward. All right, so let's move to the next one. It looks like I got booted off the webinar over here, so I'm just going to keep talking. Hopefully we can figure this one out. All right, so step 2 is to envision your future. And so remember that having a vision alone is one of the key factors of sustainability. And this is really the why should we care part of the process. So with your planning team, you're going to want to picture what sustainability would look like for your project, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now. And then think about, do you want to continue your project as it's currently funded? Do you want to move towards institutionalization or dissemination? So we've started some of that conversation today, but these are things to think through in more depth with your team. You're also going to want to think about your project niche. So what sets it apart from other programs in the community? How can you leverage that to gain further support? Involve project leaders and key stakeholders. So remember, if your vision is rooted in the community's values, it's going to be more likely to lead to a sustainable project. And finally, you want your staff to be able to articulate the vision to others. So if people don't know who your project is and why should they care, they can't support you, right? So highlighting some examples that came out of the Colorado team. So at the state level, actually the state and the local levels, both Jan and Zoa were really interested in this idea of institutionalizing their projects. So at the state level, Jan mentioned that she wanted it to become an expectation that youth who enter into their agencies receive evidence-based comprehensive sex education. So it is so integrated that is the norm, that they will receive that kind of information. She also wants to maintain a training cadre, so she can step back from the implementation, but help to provide trainers to continue to build capacity of people implementing the projects in their different settings. And then at the local level, Zoa's project in Denver, she's working with youth in systems of care. And she also had this vision of institutionalization that really speaks to having policies in place that require youth in systems of care to receive evidence-based comprehensive sex education. And that there's a collaboration of agencies who work together to provide a network of services to keep these programs going on. Okay, so let's go through to step 3.
We are there.
We are there. All right. So step 3. So once you have your team together, you've done some visioning. The next step is to assess your sustainability capacity. And so we've done a little bit of this informally, just because I wanted to get you thinking about where some of your strengths or areas you might want to improve on, where those lie. So what you see on this slide are 2 tools that I wanted to share with you. Both of these are free. They're available online, and they provide an internal capacity assessment with respect to sustainability. So I'm not going to go to them now, Jill, just for the sake of time.
Okay.
But I highly encourage you to go check out these assessments. And basically, they're based on some of those different factors that have come out of the literature, and you can do them individually and then bring your individual responses together with your team to think about the areas where you're strong, areas where you need to grow, or you can complete them together as a team. So this could be a good planning exercise to do with your team or some of your partners. But I highly suggest that you take a look at some of these capacity assessments. All right, so moving.
Jill, Steph, this is Jill. Let me just add one more thing for those who maybe are not wanting to write down the website address right now. All of the PowerPoint slides, which is going to include these citations at the end, as well as the tip sheet, will be posted on the Communities of Practice website. So for those who are concerned, will I receive the PowerPoint? I don't have the tip sheet. Access will be available, and if you don't have access right now to Communities of Practice, you'll be able to gain that by just talking to your primary grantee contact.
Right.
Okay. Now we're there.
Right.
Step 4.
Moving forward. That's good. You're giving me a chance to get connected back online. So, which I think I'm going to need in a second here. All right. So step 4. So you've put together your team, you've thought about your vision, you've assessed your capacity. So step 4 is prioritizing what it is that you want to sustain. And so one of the sustainability myths that are out there is that everything that we are currently doing must be sustained, right? So we're really invested in the work, and it's all very important. But in reality, it's rare to find projects that have been evaluated and they've honed their efforts so well that every single part of that project is absolutely critical for achieving its goal. And so, and in the reality, think about a situation in which your funding is reduced, and most of us have had this experience, especially with the recent sequestration. And so if your funding is reduced and you're forced to cut back your efforts, think about what aspects of your project would be most critical to continue until you gain the funding back to nurture the rest of the project. So the activity on this slide is something that you can do with your team. It comes from Kylie Hutchinson of Community Solutions. And so and we've provided a handout with your webinar materials that you can use for this process as well. So the idea here is, if you look at the left side of your screen, the idea is to list out all of the project components or activities that you're currently working on for your project. And so you can do this on the handout that we provided, or you can do this as a facilitated activity. So you can put all these activities on sticky notes on a wall, and then together with your team, you can think about which column they would fit into. So for each of these activities, the goal then is to prioritize which activities are most important for you to maintain within your organization, which activities you might be able to transfer to another organization to take over, or which activities you might want to discontinue. So the example on this slide comes out of Colorado. And so, and this comes out of Zoa's program in Denver. So she wants to be able to continue to train the agencies on the evidence-based programs that they're implementing. She wants to be able to maintain a cadre of trainers. But she wants to shift that implementation of the programs to those agencies. So she no longer wants to be responsible for the educators who are working with the youth themselves. And then they also do a program for foster parents. And this one kind of fell on both sides of the column. So she wants the agencies to be able to take that over, but to be able to provide them with the support that they need to be able to do that. So what we'd like to do here, or before I move on, let me just say that when you go through this process and you're making decisions about which components to continue, to share, or to drop, it helps to have some kind of decision-making criteria. So I would suggest to refer to your evaluation data to see where your project is most successful and effective, and that can help to guide some of your decisions here. All right, so moving to the next slide, what we would like to do, and I don't think I'm going to have to, Marissa, I may need your help here because I'm not back online yet. What I would like to do is to brainstorm through some of these different areas. And so thinking about your particular project, right? So you may be at very different levels, at the state level, local, tribal. Think about, if just hypothetically speaking, just because I want to force you guys to make some tough choices, if your funding today was cut in half, right? So you're working with half of what you had to work with. What would be some components that you would want to maintain within your organization? And let's see here. So Jill, can you pull up the handout still?
I sure can.
All right.
Stephanie, you need assistance with the responses coming through?
I do. Until I get back up online, can you read the questions that come in? Okay, great. So go ahead and enter into the question box. What are those things that are absolutely critical that you would want to maintain within your organization?
Training. Education, which could also be training. Fidelity monitoring. Programming for youth. Incentives. Resources. We've got implementation of curriculum in schools. Providing literature for other agencies, evaluation. We've got youth programs, which I guess could be outside of just implementation. Community connections, staffing.
And Marissa, this is Jill. We're kind of getting to the bottom of the screen here. Let me move it up a bit.
Okay.
I think that's good for now. I still can't get on the computer, but I can see what you're doing, Jill. So this works to have a three-way for your support, Marissa, on this one, for the three of us to be involved. Okay, good. So we have a lot of different ideas that came up for things that you would absolutely want to maintain within your organization. And when you do this with your teams, it may not be such a linear process, right? You may put all of your ideas on paper, and then you're kind of thinking about where you would put them into different columns. We're just going through it in a linear way for the purpose of the webinar today. So let's see, what are some project activities that you would want to transfer to another organization, or that you could transfer to an organization? And when you think about this, think about it not as just taking stuff off of your plate, but think about it as a way to how could you empower some of the partners that you're working with to be able to take some of this on. So it's not just that you're trying to push it off onto somebody else. So go ahead and enter into the chat box. Yeah, you got it first.
Okay, so we've got event training and coordination, day-to-day follow-up or assistance with logistics, in-school education, curriculum implementation, resource clearinghouse, recruitment, marketing, data collection, scheduling, after-school programs, fundraising, data entry, I may not have repeated exactly what some folks have put in there because they intersect with other ones that.
Yeah, that's good. I'm trying to see if there are some common themes that we can pull out, but it looks like maybe having the in-school education can go, some of the data collection, after-school programs. So things that maybe happen with youth can begin to transfer to the other organizations. But this may be different depending upon what's important for your project. Some of you would want to maintain something, and others of you would want to transfer that over. But again, this is just to think about, and under the situation where you have to really cut back, how could you maintain the benefits of your program over time without having the funding at your disposal tomorrow, right? So are there any activities that you might want to discontinue? And this is not to say that these are the least important parts of your project. They're just, I would say that they're things that could be postponed until later. So think of it as, a fire's come through, you want to save, you have like one seed in your hand. You want to make sure that that plant stays alive until you get the resources back to grow up your garden again, right? So are there any activities that you may want to discontinue?
Let's see, it's a sites where fewer youth are reached.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'm assuming that Jane, she put a collection of fidelity data, and I'm not sure if that was for transferring over or not. Formal evaluation, incentive, pre and post evaluation,
okay. Yeah, so I like when we say that the site for fewer youth are reached, because so it may not be that we're cutting back on the activities themselves, but we've cut back on the amount of them that we provide. So maybe we're focusing on those sites that are able to get a lot of youth, and the numbers are really well, and so that's, if we only have so much money, that's where we want to put our efforts. But so I'll stop here so that we can move on. But again, this is a great exercise to go through as your team to think about, just to prioritize what aspects of your project are most important to sustain. So Jill, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll pull it back up. Let me add to that. In the handouts that were emailed with the slides for those who received them, they should also have copies of all of the worksheets, the handouts that we're going through right now. Sorry about this. You guys are in my, gotta just find my PowerPoint again. There it is.
I know. I'm glad we have people to support us on this process. See, this is the benefit of partners. I wouldn't have been able to do this without you.
So anyhow, everyone should have these handouts that go with step 5 or 4, 5, and 6, also in Word documents, so that you can take them, modify them, use them as needed.
Okay, so let's keep moving through these steps here. And again, these are tools and activities, and I'm hoping we'll show you how to use them, that you can take them, use them with your team to really think through sustainability. So moving on to step 5, and this is where you really start to kind of take these ideas and put them onto paper for your plan, is to think about or to identify your sustainability strategies. And so what I want to do here is I want to present 2 different approaches for how you might want to think about this. I like both of them, and I think they could both be useful in different ways. So the first approach is, based on those capacity assessments that we did, or that you will do in step 3, you may identify specific areas where you want to strengthen your efforts. So that may be in communicating your results, or it may be in having a diversified funding, right? So there may be some broad areas or broad strategies that you want to focus on. And that can be what's fed into your sustainability plan. And so when you think about these strategies, the questions on this slide are just things for you to consider. So which of these areas are most urgent? Which would result in the best payoff? Which would require the fewest resources? Which would be most feasible for you to take on? And how could you prioritize these areas based on available time and resources? And so, and this will make sense when we look at that action plan. But I think this type of approach is good for those of you who are at the state level and are thinking more broadly about how to sustain an initiative. You may want to think about your sustainability strategies more broadly as well. So going to the next slide, the second approach, and I think this type of an approach, I think, might be better used by people who are thinking about sustaining a specific project, or at the local level, how can you sustain specific activities? And the way that this works, and again, this is one of the handouts that we provided to you with the webinar materials, is to think through. So you've identified your essential project activities, and so then you would list those on the left-hand side of the handout, and then think through, what are the specific resources that you need in order to continue that. So using the example that came out of Denver, is that they wanted to train agencies on evidence-based programs. So the specific resources that they would need are, the space to host a training, materials for the training, and they estimated around $2,000, the food for the training time, and salary. And so once you get a clear idea of what's needed for each of these activities, then think through what are the possible sources of resources. And what I like to think about here, when you're thinking of your sources of resources, think about who out there loves your work, who needs your work to continue, and who would really care if you were gone. And these are going to be the people who are going to help provide you with resources to keep things going. So they may be agencies who can donate different training spaces, or who may be able to donate food. Just another idea would be to make your materials green. So instead of having print copies, you can make them electronic, so just to cut down on costs. You may want to charge a fee for your training where you didn't used to do that before. So the goal is just to brainstorm all of the different ways where you might be able to generate some resources for these project activities. And then once you get to that step, that's when you begin to identify specific sustainability strategies for those project activities. So for example, the strategies that you might be thinking about here are to seek partnerships with in-kind donors, right? So that's going to be a key heading in your sustainability plan. And so for Denver, one of the examples they came up with is there's a local business, it's called Pizza Infusion, and they hire homeless to make and serve pizzas. And so since they work with youth and systems of care in Denver, they considered this to be a potential partner who would be sympathetic to their cause and could potentially donate food for their trainings, right? So just an example of a sustainability strategy, thinking about how you might replace what used to cost you a certain amount of money with a potential in-kind donation. Other strategies they came up with were to develop some key champions to support a fee-for-service model, right? So since they currently offer these services for free, if they were to charge a fee for the services, they would want some people with some influence and leadership to help support that idea. And another strategy they came up with was to do some fundraising or even to look into small grants in their community. All right, so moving forward, we wanted to walk through this example with you. And I think we have a little bit of time to do this. So let's try and do this one more time. Marissa, we're going to need you on board for this one again. So think about, all right, so think about an example. So one of your project components, and you guys identified this when we went through the last activity, was to think, you want to sustain program implementation with youth. So some of you may want to transfer this to another organization. Some of you may want to maintain it within your current organization. But for the sake of the exercise here, let's brainstorm what are all of the specific resources that you might need to continue providing that activity. And go ahead and type them into the question box.
Staff training. Money. Facilitator time and salaries. Incentives. Curricula. Space. Webinars. Political and community support. Project materials. I've got curriculum supplementary materials as well. An evaluator. Interested agencies. Oh, this is a good one. Participants.
Very true.
Community support.
Community support, okay. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to keep us moving forward, but you get the idea. So really brainstorm what are all the resources that are needed out there, right? So then moving on to the second column, or I guess it's the third column, think about possible sources for some of these resources. And again, you'll be thinking about it from your specific community perspective, but brainstorm what comes to mind. What might be some possible sources for these resources? And let's share ideas across partners.
Okay. Let's see, state funders, connections with other entities for financial support. I'm hoping that I'm not reading ones that were supposed to be for the other column. Grants.
This looks right. Looks right.
Partners, collaborative partners, schools and community centers, private foundations, donations or in-kind donations, volunteers, federal funding, college interns, grandparenting parents. Yeah, the train school staff to implement within the classroom. Free incentives like school credit.
Great.
TANF participants.
I'm going to move to the other page.
All right, looks like we're kind of running out of space, and for the sake of time, I'll just have us move forward at this point. But this is good, and you know, I think what we see when we do the brainstorming is that oftentimes, you know, the first ideas that come out are the most obvious, but then when you sit down and you really look at the list for, you know, 10 to 15 minutes, that's when you start to get some creative ideas that come out. So when you're doing this with your team, you know, take the time for those creative ideas, okay? So then looking at this list, the next step would be to then start thinking about what would be the strategies that you could take for securing these resources. And this could draw upon some of those sustainability factors that we talked about earlier, or you may think of some strategies that are really specific to these types of resources. So let's brainstorm. What are some strategies that come to mind when thinking about how you might secure some of these resources?
We've got fee for service. Conducting trainings that are open to the community. Provide community-wide events to recruit fundraisers and volunteers. Tapping board member expertise and experience. Meet with local colleges for support. And this is similar to what was put in the former column, offer internships and college credit. Presentations at school board meetings. We might have to abbreviate this entry. Inviting community partners and funders to the decision-making and planning table to begin building those relationships. Creating a task force of champions. Program and project sponsorship. Political affiliations. Meeting with the community-based services staff.
And let's do one more.
Okay. The local shack support.
The local shack support?
Right, the school health.
Okay, got it.
School Health Advisory Committee.
Advisory Committee, thank you.
Yeah. Good, so a lot of these ideas are really speaking to kind of building these partnerships and calling upon potential resources, champions, partners in the community. So I think that's really good. And it's like it's where you want to start getting your ideas to focus. So I want to move on, but I'm hoping that this is a useful exercise for you guys to really think outside of the box in terms of how you can take on some different strategies for securing resources that you need to maintain your project. So moving on to the next step, we have step 6. And once you identify these strategies, the next step is to really flesh out the action plan for it. And again, you have a handout that looks similar to this as well. We included a couple more columns in your handout that you received with your webinar materials. But the idea here is to take each of those strategies, be it a broad strategy or a specific strategy, and think about the specific steps you need to take to make it happen. So here we see, the example, going back to our original example, of seeking partnerships with in-kind donors. Some specific steps may be to make a list of all the resources that are needed that could come from in-kind donors, make a list of all potential partners who have donations to give, and then to develop a pitch that shares the project vision as well as why or what partners might stand to gain, and then to contact those partners and to make the ask. So it's just breaking down each strategy into what the steps are, who will be the person responsible. So these are folks from Zoa's team, as well as a timeline for when those things will happen. All right, so moving to the next slide. The final steps are really to implement the action plan and evaluate your efforts. And all I really want to say about this is that it's, this is a very organic and dynamic process. And so start early and then monitor your progress towards each step. So Jill, go ahead and forward the slide if you haven't already. So monitor your progress towards each step, and then use the results from monitoring, you're achieving these steps towards your action plan. Discuss them with your stakeholders. What's working, what's not working, and how can you keep moving this process forward. And then when you evaluate your efforts, what we suggest is to reassess your sustainability capacity either yearly or biannually. So go back to those assessments that you did in step 3 and see if you're improving your capacity in some of these areas. So moving forward, I'd like to just pause there and again, and see if there are any questions. And Marissa, I can't see anything, so if you can read any questions out loud, that'd be great. We don't have a lot of time left, so perhaps we can take 1 or 2 questions now, and then I'm happy to answer questions by email if you want to send me an email afterwards.
Sure. So we've got a couple of questions that I thought would be good to address for the whole group. We just received one that says, when should we start thinking about sustaining our program or projects? I think that's an easy one for you to answer.
Yeah, great question. And start as early as possible. It's actually never too early to start your sustainability planning. And so if you haven't started, I'd say go ahead and start now. And the idea is that the more you kind of have that vision for the future, you've got something to work towards. And so, and all of the tools that we'll show you on our resource list can help you with that.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I would say if you haven't started already, don't worry about it. It's not like, oh my gosh, you're behind. It's just, I think many of us are in that boat, right? And it's just something that we're not always expected to do when we begin the planning process. And so the idea is just, to shift our way of thinking about that so we get it started.
I just want to make an announcement that the webinar slides are going to be posted to the Communities of Practice website, but we're also going to be posting it to the FISBE website because we do have some folks from OAH that are on the webinar right now that don't have access to the Communities of Practice website. So the FISBE website is an open access website, and anybody can download the materials that are posted on there. If you want me to ask you a question, Stephanie, I've got one.
Let's do one more, and then we'll close it up.
Okay, great. So this is going to take a little concentration. It's a little long.
Okay.
How are we to keep up with the high bar associated with evidence-based programming? I ask because maintaining licenses and training for evidence-based programming is expensive. Often communities can keep the programming going in the short term because the institutionalization is in place. However, in the long run, getting training and licensure may not be covered by future grants or funding streams. Community partners often swing from funding branch to funding branch, and it can be a challenge to keep up with the expensive evidence-based programming.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and I've heard that from grantees before, that some of the training required to implement these programs is really expensive. And being from an agency like ATR that provides these trainings, I can tell you that we're thinking about this on our end too, and and how is it that we can make these trainings more accessible. And to be honest, I think you're going to start seeing more of these trainings being available online or different opportunities to get training. I think some of the licensing that's out there is sometimes it's a misnomer. I know that some agencies require have some requirements about that, or sometimes funders do. But that's not always the case. So again, I think that's another thing that you'll see as part of the discussions as we move forward too, is what are those requirements for people to be able to implement some of these programs. And there may not be as many specific requirements out there as people might think that there are. With that, I want to keep us moving forward because I know that we're running out of time. I think that's a great question, though. It's a challenging question, but I just want to say that it's something that I think we're thinking about on all levels. So moving forward, I was going to have time to share some sustainability successes, but we are at the end of our webinar. So what I would encourage you to do is that if you have a great sustainability success in your experience that you want to share, you can either post it to the Communities of Practice website, or share it with somebody that you've met at a training or at a conference, but I want you to connect with somebody else and share some of the successes that you had, because I think that's how we're going to contribute most to our collective learning. And then for the next slide, Jill, I'd also like to send you away with some homework. I'm a big believer in homework. I'm in school at the moment, so I think it helps us. It helps us learn. All right, so for your homework, the first thing that I want you to do is to complete one of those sustainability assessments. And you can either do this individually or you can do it with your team. But I want everyone to take the time to look at those assessments and think it through and complete it. And then the second thing is to really develop a concrete sustainability plan. If you have not done so already, and you can use the tools that we've provided. There are also many other templates and tools that we've listed in your resources section. So going to the next slide, if you have any further assistance, please don't hesitate to contact your project officer to request technical assistance. Again, you can visit the Communities of Practice website where all of these materials will be posted, and as well as the FISBE site where I believe they're posting a live version of this webinar to access later. And then in closing, go ahead and go to the next slide, Jill. So as we close it up, just think to yourself, and we don't have to share this now, but what is one important point from today's webinar that you want to remember? And you can just click it one more time, Jill. You can write this down on your notes or on your slide. Just want to make sure that we're internalizing some of the learning from the webinar today. All right, so the final slides, these slides show what I think are some great resources on sustainability. The second one from the top, the Center for Civic Partnerships, if you put a little star by that, one of the capacity assessments comes from this resource. At the bottom, the Hayes citation, this is a great framework that was used to inform the tip sheet. So that's another one of our favorites that we came across. And then going to the next slide, if you go to, let's see, the third from the bottom, Washington University 2013A, this is that sustaintool.org website. So definitely go through here, look at some of the tools that are available. The resource right below it is a related website through their, I forget what the CPHSS stands for, but it's their center that's working on this. It's at Washington University. And so there's some more tools there that you can access. All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and your participation. I truly hope that you got something out of this that will be useful to help you to start thinking about sustainability. And again, I love answering questions through email, so please feel free to contact me or request TA through your project officer. All right, and with that, I will close things up. And guys, I have no access, so you're going to have to end the webinar because I can't do it from where I am.
Sure, I will end the webinar, and there's another number for debriefing in your email inboxes as a reminder.
Okay, thank you so much.